People in the US military. What's the creepiest, most paranormal thing you have encountered during your service? Submariner here. There are few things as unnerving as wondering about the engine room from 2330 to 0530 alone on watch. When the boat is largely shut down in port, it becomes a very quiet place. The roving watches usually make it an hourly game to speed through their log rounds, especially in the lower levels. One particular in port period, the boat was moored in Pearl Harbor, and a few people started complaining about a real uneasy feeling. I was on the mid-watch as the SAO one evening, and a senior chief came back to do his required 0300 tour. We saw him walk past maneuvering on his way to Shaft Alley. This particular senior chief was the crusty old salt type and would usually spend a bit of time just sitting in the lower levels of the engine room alone and contemplate life, so we expected as much. What we didn't expect was him to literally run into the maneuvering area a few minutes later. The man was pale-faced and breathing heavily. We sat up straight, our eyes as wide as his, thinking we were about to have to announce and fight some ship casualty. He slumps into the Edo chair. A few tense and silent moments go by. We're on pins and needles. He finally opens his mouth and tells us about the fleabing ghost in Shaft Alley. Swears a sailor passes by him as he's sitting on a trash can in Shaft Alley. His first response was to call out to the guy, see who it was. But then he realized this guy isn't dressed right. He describes what this guy was wearing, the old World War II naval uniforms. So he quickly gets up to catch up to the guy, and he does. Catches up to him all the way aft. The guy turns towards the senior chief. Looks right at him. Then turns away and literally walks through butt end of the boat. It's now that the senior chief decides it's time to leave Shaft Alley, and promptly does so. Swears up and down that he knows what he saw. I sure as heck wasn't about to leave maneuvering that night to find out for myself. My dad's stories. He served in the Taiwanese Marines as a drill sergeant. Much of the ground in Taiwan was violence under occupation, and it was rumored his base was built on or near a mass grave. Needless to say, he's had a few paranormal stories. He had a guy report to him in the morning exhausted but frazzled. The night before, he had been on guard duty, overlooking the firing range. The targets on the range were a mix of clay and wood figures, cut and drawn to look like an enemy soldier aiming a rifle at you. According to the guard, when he'd been bored out of his mind staring out over the range, he saw clear as day one of the clay soldiers wearily lay down his rifle and exclaim, "Darn, I'm tired." The guard said he passed out from fright. During the evening, when training was over, the sergeants for the most part had the time to themselves. My dad liked to go snake hunting during dusk when the heat was rising from the ground and the snakes came out of their holes. So one evening he sets out, carrying a bag, a nice long stick, and a flashlight. As he was making his way across the field, zigzagging in a search pattern, he found himself getting closer and closer to an old, decrepit outhouse that had been abandoned as it was too far from the main base. As he got within a few yards of it, he was hit with a sudden feeling of apprehension. Something told him going near the outhouse was a bad idea. At that moment, his flashlight, aimed right at the construct, went out. He fiddled with the battery, smacked it, thought, "Fleeb, better get a new battery," and turned around to head back. The moment he turned and faced the main base, the flashlight flickered back on. Great, time to keep hunting. The moment he turned to face the outhouse, it flickered off again. Faced the base, it flickered on. He did this 2 or 3 times, got the message, verbally apologized for intruding, turned and walked calmly back to base. The base itself was surrounded by forest and mountains, the natural terrain of Taiwan. One day, a soldier was reported missing. As the day went on, it was clear that he'd either deserted or was in serious trouble. A manhunt rescue team was organized, and most of the base was out searching for the guy as the rain started to come in. As night fell, they called it off and got ready to try again tomorrow. They found him in the morning, huddled in a wet dark cave, scared speechless and out of his mind. No one was sure what he saw to cause him to freak out, and they never found out. They shipped the guy out soon afterwards. Finally, one of his years on the base, it was hit with a huge typhoon. Typhoons are pretty regular in Taiwan, especially during the summer, but this one was going to set records. Everyone hunkered down and reinforced the base as best they could, and it held well, and after days of relentless rain and wind, they emerged to survey the damage. One of the trees on base had been hundreds of years old. It sat on a hill and overlooked the base, and so had been the site of a Buddhist shrine set at its roots. Now the roots twisted and turned into the air. The storm had torn the tree from the ground. And yet, the shrine itself was untouched, even the red silk covering, with nothing weighing it down, hadn't moved an inch despite the winds that had finally torn the great tree from its hill after hundreds of years. The soldiers took this as a sign that despite whatever would be thrown against them, their spirit would remain strong and unmoved. I was in the US Navy and worked in communications. I was a supervisor on my watch and enjoyed working the night tours while on deployment. We stood 12-hour watches from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Around 2 a.m., I hear some chatter over the 3MC, which is like our internal speaker system used between a few different stations on the ship. It's the bridge asking combat if they see anything on surface or air radar, maybe 10 miles out to our west. Combat returns with a negative and I don't think anything of it. About 15 minutes goes by and the bridge asks again and asks are they sure there's nothing there. Then they ask us if we have any message traffic about any ships in the area, aircraft or anomalous weather patterns. I ask one of the guys on watch to perform the request and now my interest is piqued. I walk out of the comm center and head up to the bridge. I was on a frigate so the walk was quick and I get up there and ask what's going on. One of my buddies points me over to the port side and we walk over. There's about 5 or 6 circular-shaped lights about 10 to 15 miles out in the clouds, pretty large. They aren't moving or flying around but just looking stable. These lights are also casting lights downward on the ocean, and you can see the light refracting back at the water. From what we could see, it didn't appear to be lights shining up from the water because they wouldn't pass through the clouds. The clouds also weren't super thick, it was lightly overcast, and it was the middle of the night with no other light pollution on the water. There was nothing in message traffic about any ships, subs, or aircraft in the area. We were hundreds of miles from land, and the last report of any unusual weather patterns was a waterspout a few hundred miles away. We tried to take pictures with our onboard digital camera using a long exposure, but we couldn't capture the phenomenon. After about 90 minutes, the lights slowly faded and then completely disappeared. I'm sure there's some sort of weather or atmospheric condition for what we saw, but for all intents and purposes, it fit the description of a UFO unidentified flying object. Alright, hope I'm not too late. But I have a buddy who told me a story that he probably made up, but it makes a great ghost story nonetheless. I'll recall the story to the best of my ability, but I will not be able to do his story justice since I haven't heard the story in a few years. This is all classified according to him. He was stationed at a base in the Middle East somewhere. The base was surrounded by a wall that had guard posts at various locations around the wall and 1 or 2 other locations that soldiers would keep post, including barracks. There was also a big abandoned warehouse on the base that was not being used. It had huge heavy doors that opened outward from the middle, which were always closed. Soldiers had to walk past this warehouse when switching post. Well, one night when my buddy was in his barracks, gunshots went off. Everyone rushed to get geared up and figure out what was going on. Once they figured out the gunshots came from inside the base, they went to the location of the shots. 2 soldiers were posted up, guns pointed to the old warehouse, and were freaked to flee out. One of the doors to the warehouse was pushed slightly open. They yelled at the 2 soldiers to see what the fleeb was going on, but the guys didn't budge. They said that something big and black just ran inside that warehouse. Once they calmed the 2 guys down, they did a sweep of the warehouse and found nothing. It took 2 soldiers to push the door shut again. The next night, there was screaming coming from inside the warehouse. They did a sweep. Nothing. Next night, more screams. Third night, another group of soldiers shifting locations opened fired. They basically had the same story as the first group. They said it was fast as heck and basically moved faster than they could aim and shoot. Again, the door was pushed open. Took 2 guys to close it. After this went on for a while, and the soldiers were found mentally healthy, a bigger investigation was set up. They pointed some special cameras at the entrance to the warehouse, set up some guys outside, and waited for something to happen. Well, one night the door was pushed open on camera, and there was basically a demon that stepped out and started screaming. The guards opened fire, and the thing sprinted faster than humanly possible back inside the warehouse. Both doors were flung open and the thing just screamed. More soldiers came and did a sweep. Nothing. Around this time, the soldiers at the base started to piece a few things together. They had always known that a village near the base has a curfew and no one stays out of their house past nightfall. So some went to investigate why. And long story short, the villagers told them that there was a god of death in the area and they dare not stay out past nightfall. Around the time they learned this, a special team came in with more equipment. Some bigger gunners were sent in, including my buddy with special recording equipment. They dragged the big double doors open and set up inside the warehouse. It was pitch black, but they could see with their equipment. They set up so 2 guys sat facing each other, making a square of 4 guys total. About 4 hours went by without anything happening. Then, the guy across from my buddy started making a hand signal. He was signaling that something was behind my friend. The guy to the right of my buddy was dozing off, and other soldier across from my buddy was perfectly still. My buddy did a 180 from his chair to a crouched position, giving room for him and the guy across from him to open fire. He said when he turned around, he just saw this humanoid demon, around 9 feet tall, piercing eyes, and menacing as possible. When he opened fire, the thing was so fast it basically teleported to the side and up the wall until it was on the ceiling. They continued to open fire, but the thing was fast and kept appearing behind each of the soldiers, endangering them. Eventually the soldiers got the equipment and abandoned the building. The cameras apparently captured everything. My friend was debriefed and told to never speak of it again, and the building was demolished. The villagers related the demon to an old mass grave near the base, which after the events above, was dug up, and everyone was given a proper burial. I without a doubt did not recall everything correctly, his version had way more detail. The way my buddy tells this story is so convincing and detailed that it's hard not to believe him, but the story is so incredible that it's very hard to believe at the same time. I wish I could get him to type it out for y'all because it's simply amazing. Navy Boot Camp, Orlando. I was alone on watch in our company's barracks compartment. I was checking all the windows because the CC liked to unlock 1 or 2 to make sure we checked them all. That put me between the racks, bunk beds, and the wall. I caught movement down the middle open area of the compartment, a flash of white. White shoes meant brand new recruit, we had been there longer enough, we were wearing our black Oxfords. I went between the racks to the middle so I could see who had come into the compartment. The outside door definitely hadn't opened, and I would have heard the door by the inside stairwell. The door to the laundry area was locked. Standing across the open area, by the other row of racks, was a girl with curly dark hair wearing the same female utilities as me, light blue shirt, black pants. She was wearing the white tennis shoes, which meant she'd only been there a couple weeks. She looked at me, then she wasn't there. No place for her to go, we were in the middle of the compartment, yards from any door, and nowhere to hide. I didn't see her move, she just wasn't there one moment to the next. Only saw her for a heartbeat or two. Spookier still, years later, our new FN was telling about roving patrol watch at boot camp and how they kept finding a pair of white sneakers in the locked laundry room of an empty compartment. Freaked her out. Said the red lights always look darker in there. They do their checks and leave as fast as they could. Thought one of the CCs was playing a joke with the shoes. I asked which building, which wing, which floor. Yep, my old compartment where I had seen the girl.